I'm an ethnographer, an ethnographic researcher. And for the past few years, I've been working in consultancies and digital agencies. Are customers willing to shift to this new way of moving, this new mobility, and accept the new technology? Yes, they were. However, came with provisos to do with the context, which was so important that we had an immersive methodology and we used ethnography to follow these participants in their journeys to see how they acted. So, for example, we found that, no surprise really, but weather played a huge role, in willingness to accept things like active travel nudges or to decide, at that point of travel before I set off on my journey, I'm going to use a bike or I'm going to walk. Actually, something as simple as the weather would hugely shift, the willingness to take, an active travel route rather than a private car or more polluting route. Very interesting superheroes and our depictions and idealization of these figures as two halves of the same coin, really. We've got this fear of a dystopian future, of the end of us, the end of humanity. But we look to the superhero as this savior figure, and maybe it's a bit of a replacement for religion.
What is your greatest joy?
Probably, aside from research and ethnography, probably my cat and my family.
Oh, nice.
In that order.
Hello, fellows. Welcome to the next episode of Jagged with Jasravi. Subscribe to my channel for conversations at the edge with thought leaders from the marketing, branding, and the business world. Conversations that ignite new ideas with rough, sharp edges. Hi, Felicity. So nice to have you on my show.
Hi, Jasbury. Great to be here. Really excited to speak to you today.
Okay. If I requested you to tweet your profile, what would you say?
Ooh, is that 140 characters or less? Let me have a think.
It can be 280. Yeah.
Oh, of course. They've changed it now, haven't they? Yes. Thank goodness. Extended it out. A few more words. Well, I think I would probably lead with the fact that I'm a researcher, first and foremost. That is my passion. That is my first love, research. My background is in ethnographic research. So I would say I'm an ethnographer, an ethnographic researcher. And for the past few years, I've been working in consultancies and digital agencies to provide insight and behavioural research to a broad range of transportation and infrastructure, mainly clients. Really, my role on any project or for any business is to help my clients to understand their customers or understand their staff or their suppliers, but really provide valuable insight that is not available to them through more traditional methodologies of research.
So, Felicity, ethnography, okay, it's an anthropological tool. Yes, it's being used in the commercial sector. It's been adapted. But still, should we take it up? Do we have the time? Are we really going to challenge anything here? So what is, when you have to educate clients, for example, or you have to tell them that, what you're going to get that you're not going to get from conventional research methods. Now here, persuading them to do some research itself is a challenge because they feel like,
absolutely.
Yeah, we know it, right? We've been doing this for so many years. I mean, consumer evolution. I mean, yeah, but how much, And then there is an ethnography where, it's a very different mindset and very different, application in terms of the stage that you would do it. So how do you tackle this?
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's a great question, Jasbury, particularly to kind of start with for some of your listeners who might be thinking about buying research or commissioning research or trying to understand their customers, for example, and how they might buy their products. When would be an appropriate time to use ethnography? How would they best use that? in collaboration with the more traditional market research methodologies, or instead of, maybe. So for me, it comes down to, is the problem that we're trying to solve here, does that problem require us to have a real richness of understanding of your customers and their behaviors in context? So, for example, if we're thinking about how shoppers might spend in store versus online, some of that we can understand through traditional market research methods. So, for example, I recently moved to Simple Usability, who are part of CDS, and they really specialize in UI testing, in usability kind of one-on-one sessions, looking at websites and mobile apps with potential customers or existing customers. And that can be great and really useful to understand that customer journey and how people are, landing on the site, going through, etc., and what some of those pain points may be. How can we improve that process? That's fine. But in terms of, for example, in-store behaviors, often the physical space is a bit more black boxed. So we'll be making assumptions about why customers are choosing to purchase certain items or why they're choosing to purchase certain ways. And in terms of retailing and buying, there's obviously a lot of research, around how stores are kind of physically set out, and how we can use behavioral nudging to shift consumers to buy certain products, etc., which is all great. But the context is so important. And without a real rich understanding of that context, by using methods such as participant observation, so ethnography would be a key player in that, really we are reliant on those assumptions about, we know from this marketing model that this works and this should drive, sales and behavior. But actually the context is everything, because if a shop is in a specific kind of community, for example, one that's more disadvantaged, for example, in the north of England, actually people might be going into that shop for topping up their electricity, or for their mobile phone, or for other kinds of social interactions that are not being taken account of in terms of the purchase journey. So context is really everything, and we can see how that impacts international markets and how brands set to expand and how they choose to market their products and create different strategies that are regionally differentiated or internationally differentiated. So for me, ethnography, it can really help clients to understand the real needs of their customers in very specific contexts, and provide them with a kind of granularity and understanding of the real problems and the real pain points and also opportunities for their customers that can't be accessed by, for example, sending a survey or just doing some UI testing. So those things are great, but for me, often when it's a complex problem and when you need that granularity, you need to start with the ethnography or start with a more rich, qualitative, immersive approach. And of course, not all projects need that. With projects with small budgets and with really limited time, it's fine to rely on assumptions. We've got some models that we can use for that, right? But when it's really important to get that right, then ethnography can actually be a very cost efficient and I would say time efficient, because it saves money later down the line, right? If you really understand the problem and the context and the solution that your customers really need, then you don't need to spend loads of time later down the line changing an information architecture or changing a product solution, because you're going to get that right first time.
Yeah. Beautifully explained. Sorry, I really packed the first question only with so many sub-bullet points. But, as you were talking, I was reminded of a project that we had done for Coke, where they wanted to launch, Felicity, they wanted to launch for blue-collared workers, stimulating drink. And the whole assumption was that they have a lot of cash in hand, and they need a lot of stimulation because sometimes they have to drive and be on the roads, the truck drivers, they're on the roads for, many hours altogether. And this would help them be more efficient and, take care of their need for stimulation and sometimes relaxation. And we did ethnographies with truck drivers, like traveling with them.
Oh, wow.
Across the journey. Amazing. And this is early in my career, Felicity, and that's why I became a fan of this, technique and methodology, because all the assumptions came out wrong.
Right. And, ethnography can do that.
Yeah. So they are cash strapped. They actually take little loans when they stop at petrol pumps, and they have that kind of a relationship with the person who's managing the petrol pump on the highways. And the whole stimulation rituals and habits are, something that is something that they are very deeply, it's very deeply entrenched in their day. Like they would have a gutka and, while driving they'd have, or they'd slosh themselves down and drink country liquor, at the end of the day. And something that's in between and habit changing and doing neither of the two, was just not made thinking of them.
It wasn't going to work for that market. No, right?
Yeah, and like you said, so much money got saved because just at the idea level, they figured out this is not going to work.
It's always a real surprise to me how many projects get to those later stages without having, a really good quality discovery phase, understanding that problem statement, validating the assumptions, doing some deep dive research with your stakeholders, your potential customers, your market, because absolutely, if we don't do that, we are working on assumptions. And if we accept that, then that's fine. But absolutely, for a company like Coca-Cola, we, Simple Usability, have just finished some work for them as well. And lots of these other big e-commerce brands, it's really important, that they can get their sales forecast right, and that they can have confidence that their market segments are right for each product. So yeah, absolutely, it makes so much sense to use the ethnographic method to understand the real life and the real rituals of your different audiences.
Yeah. And Felicity, because like when a technique or a methodology is adapted, and then the lesser cousins of it evolve.
Sure.
So
I know.
Let's just do this much, and we'd call it that, and etc. Yes. So as a practitioner, if you had to say that this is the mindset you need, and this is the minimum amount of time you need to spend to actually call it a real immersive learning, what would you mention here?
I think this is a really important point, actually, Jasvari. So often I will talk about, in project proposals or to potential clients, I'll talk about ethnographic methods or immersive or deep dive methods. Absolutely, because really to call a project an ethnography in a more purist academic sense, you need years, not months, not weeks, not days. You need years, to really understand a group of participants, a group of interlocutors, people that you are understanding their world, you're stepping into their worlds, and you as the ethnographer need that time to become immersed in a community, in those rituals, those habits, those networks of everyday life. And for me, as a specialist in organizational ethnography, for me, that's work relationships and, those networks that happen and develop within organizations. So, for example, I did, as part of my PhD thesis, a 2-year immersive study with one of the big UK banks. And that provided me that time with enough opportunity to get some sense of the culture and how the business was moving in terms of all of these different microcultures and these different technologies that they were trying to bring together, key challenges for the business in terms of the value proposition and the legacy as well. So kind of what are we trying to sell off or get rid of in terms of technology, as well as what are the new exciting, sexy services that we want our customers to buy into. But it really took me a long time to get that full picture of the organization. And this is just their technology functions. It wasn't looking at, the more kind of customer banking functions. So absolutely, if we want to really do this properly and we want to call this a rigorous methodology and for it to get into, academic journals and be peer reviewed, etc. Yeah, we need years to do ethnography properly. But again, from my perspective as a more commercial practitioner and consultant, and have been working in that world for some time now, away from the more traditional academic way of doing things. Obviously, the commercial sector has got far shorter timeframes and budgets are constrained, and you have to work as an ethnographer or a researcher within an ecosystem of many other players in that team, to do with project delivery and budget and stakeholders, etc. And everyone has their own agenda, so you can't just have a nice academic project and think about knowledge creation and what's really true and all the rest of it. It really, one has to adapt that method. And like you say, you get these kind of, this Frankensteinian family of sort of cousins of the initial methodology of ethnography. A few years ago, I was trying to kind of propose a methodology of peaking, like ethnographic peaking. So you didn't have to go the whole hog, but actually you could just spend a couple of days doing a little bit of, immersive work, immersive observation. And that at least gives you a peek into that world. It gives you something. Definitely doesn't give you everything. It probably doesn't give you enough to understand everything, but it's better than nothing, right? It's better than not doing that, or just doing a survey, or just, doing a much more light touch methodology. So I suppose to answer the question, for me, it's about project by project, looking at the scope, looking at the aims and the timescales, and how can we really add the value with immersive deep dive methodologies, even if that doesn't encompass the full gambit of ethnography and we just have a few weeks or a few days to do interviews in context or to do observation. Also, virtual ethnographies can be much more time bound because you're studying remotely those online spaces, so a lot more can happen in a short period of time, which is really useful, I think, for some sectors and some customers. So yes, I think that's for me, it is very much kind of dependent on each case.
I'm just reminded of a study that an ethnographer had done, by which they had warned Nokia that smartphones are coming and they will really penetrate. The thing that is emerging right now, and there is no evidence of behavior, only an ethnographic approach can let you detect it, because
yes,
the data isn't there. The data is capturing behavior, and the tendencies or the need is developing right now in the consumer segment.
100%. I absolutely agree with you, Jasvery. So I suppose one example I can think of from my own experience, and the market has moved on a little bit since I did get involved with that while I was at Atkins, where I started in 2017. But the market for mobility as a service and for connected and autonomous vehicles at that time was even more immature than it is now. I think it's still immature, and it's taking a longer time than expected for these technologies to develop to maturity, and for customers to, one, accept them and change behaviors, but also for governments to decide what is their strategy around mobility as a service and CAVs, because really these two things go hand in hand. And I've been doing quite a few research studies in my time over the past 5 years or so, looking at in-depth behaviors in terms of how are customers approaching these new technology solutions, these new packages of mobility, which are quite different from, I've got my own private car and that's how I'm going to travel, and this is my autonomous journey, to actually moving to a model of shared ownership where you don't have to own a car. Actually, we could all use that car, and a car is an asset that is depreciating in value, although not so much now with the crazy prices at the moment for secondhand cars. But it's not working for us with it just being on our drive, and actually it's costing us a lot of money, particularly now with the cost of living crisis in the UK and other parts of the world. So there's a great use case there for customers to change their behavior, particularly travel behaviors, and for governments to invest in these solutions to try and bring these things together. But unless they happen simultaneously, unless governments are going to make some regulatory and financial investment decisions around these technologies, I feel we're not really going to get there. We're not going to gain those benefits that could be there from the immersive research that I've done and that I know others have done in this space, where actually customers would be willing to change their behaviors and are excited about that, particularly the younger generations, actually, that they're much less attached to that identity of the private vehicle. But yes, again, unless we get that momentum behind the new technologies, nothing will shift, and customers remain in that paradigm of this is how things are. I can't see beyond that. So then there becomes almost no point in continuing to do this immersive research in that space, because we need that change to change the paradigm before we go back and really understand what's changing. And I just don't think we're there yet, certainly in the UK. I think the US is a little bit further on in terms of those technologies, but there's so much to do.
Yeah. Could you share some insights about this study? This is so fascinating and so useful to how we want to live.
Yeah, sure. So thinking specifically about mobility as a service, for example. So in the UK, I was involved in the first local authority trial of a mobility as a service product, which back in 2017, 2018, that was what we would call in research kind of a Wizard of Oz. So, it appeared to be a nice, flashy app, but actually behind the scenes, you had a team who were doing the operations and who were manually working out our 40 participants' different journeys and giving them advice and helping them and all of that stuff. But the aim of that study was really to understand, would this group that was recruited based on very specific characteristics. So we wanted some people who had accessibility issues. We wanted some people who were, of a younger demographic, some who were of an older demographic, etc. We wanted to test acceptance of a new way of using technology to move around. Whether a MAS app could replace all these other apps that people have, like Google Maps and City Mapper and all the other ones for wherever you live to get your tickets and things like that. So that was the aim of the project. And in terms of results, what did we find? So that project went on and had various additional iterations right through the pandemic, actually. So then we did some COVID profiling and looked at how COVID behaviours were changing in terms of travel behaviours. But one of the key findings that we found in terms of are customers willing to shift to this new way of moving, this new mobility, and accept the new technology? Yes, they were. However, that came with provisos to do with the context, which was so important that we had an immersive methodology and we used ethnography to follow these participants in their journeys to see how they acted. So, for example, we found that, no surprise really, but weather played a huge role in willingness to accept things like active travel nudges, or to decide, at that point of travel before I set off on my journey, I'm going to use a bike or I'm going to walk. Even if somebody was very motivated, to be more active or very motivated in terms of their environmental identity, actually something as simple as the weather would hugely shift, the willingness to take an active travel route rather than a private car or more polluting route. So that was really interesting. And also we found if one was to introduce an automated service, if people know it's automated, so for example, I need some advice because my train's been cancelled, how can I, I just want to go to a one-stop service to get that. People don't like it when they know it's automated, so they automatically have this this attitude of it won't be good, so I'm not going to use it, the service will be poor, etc. So by introducing personalization and a feeling of a bit like uncanny valley, this is real, there's a real person here, using emojis, using more familiar language, people were much more willing to go back to the app and to try the new technology. But again, that's a challenge then when you have an automated service for everybody with these blanket responses, people hate it. So I think those were just two examples of the insight from that particular trial.
Yeah, lovely. And the why and the context come out so strongly as so crucial to understanding what's really happening and what next you can do. Otherwise, like you said, the baby with the bathwater goes, and you don't know where to start again, So technology and culture design, Felicity, is so exciting because, it's like the roots and the wings coming together,
That's interesting. I like that way of putting it. Yes.
What is our subconscious driving us as it's just how it's appearing to me right now, and what's possible, where we can. Yes. So that's an ethnography tying the two. How does that happen? Please share with us how an anthropological approach can help us understand and design this better.
Absolutely. Great question. So ethnography, as you say, an anthropological methodology that deals with culture, right, straight off the bat, because ethnography, writing culture, So ethnography is always, no matter what context, no matter if it's virtual, digital, face-to-face, etc., the key driver for ethnography and the key field of interest will always be culture. How people are responding to their environments, their networks of influence, their habits, as you say, some of those more unconscious drivers, etc. Those things, if we think about Shine's model of culture that go below the iceberg, all of those assumptions and values, all of that really exciting stuff, ethnography is always going to be interested in that. So that's a kind of given. So that's great. But when you apply that to a field or to a project of interest where you've got a cutting edge technology, or not necessarily cutting edge, you've just got a technology that the client wants to understand better, how are my users using my technology, or how can I get my staff to be more productive on this new system? How can I go through a change management process internally, whatever it might be to do with technology? Absolutely, using a more immersive approach to understand that will really help. Number one for me, because, and I'm thinking back now to my work on Cyborgs and how kind of Donna Haraway's work really influenced me, and a lot of that techno-feminist work. The Cyborg, if we think of it as this sort of human technological interplay and this relationship, that's always there for us. We always have these prostheses whenever we're interacting with a system, and particularly more and more now, because society has gone through and continues to go through a digital transformation, and more core services to our lives are only accessible via digital means, more and more. And I think that isn't going to change anytime soon. It's something that we have to accept, that the human experience and the technology are coming very, very closely together. And I don't think it will be too long now before we do have much more physical prosthesis of, for example, I think the Google Glass was a bit early, but I think that is the way it's going. It's quite a hassle now, people carrying around this heavy smartphone in your hand. You really want your hand to be a smartphone, or you want it to be in your body. It would be so much easier to check my emails, or to, just tell someone to be quiet, rather than having to pick up this thing. So I think that's where we need to get to. That's another paradigm shift. I'm sure it will be coming. But ethnography can really help us to understand where some of those shifts might happen and identify before those shifts happen, or before we get to the singularity or the future, how are existing systems and technologies being used in different subcultures. And again, we can make lots of assumptions about that, but usually they're wrong, actually, and we need to study them, and we need to do that work of observation and ethnographic interviewing to really get that, and to spend time understanding how different systems are used. So one example, in my new role, we're just about to start a project with one of the UK trains companies to observe at just one station that's unmanned. So there's never any staff there. How are customers, train passengers, using the ticket machines, for things like information, or to ask for assistance, or to just do things like buy tickets or check times. So by understanding that, we can get rid of a lot of assumptions around how that technology is used, and also validate, a lot of those assumptions as we've talked about before. So yeah, for me, ethnography does definitely play this really important role of bringing technology and understanding culture together in a way that other research methodologies can't do.
Yeah. So Cyborg, Felicity, how could you demystify for our audiences what is, because I really liked, you've written about it, how humans are also cyborgs at some level. So if you could first tell how you define it, how how you look at it, and what really got you interested. You were talking about feminism as well, how it lets you transgress all these boundaries, divisive boundaries. So share a little bit here.
Absolutely, sure. Yes. So it was really the work of Donna Haraway that got me interested in cyborgs, from her Cyborg Manifesto, and the work that followed from that, because that was really quite a seminal moment in techno-feminism in terms of the academic literature. Following on from that, right into the 90s, you get a lot of literature, mostly picked up by feminists and those who are thinking about human inequalities and problems of inequality. But how can we then relate that to what's happening in the culture in the 80s and 90s, where obviously we have a lot of this sci-fi, and there's a bit of an obsession about the rise of the machine, and you get films like the Terminator and Blade Runner, and it's very scary that technology could have consciousness, or could have its own will, and an autonomous kind of being, and you really get this picked up in the zeitgeist in the 80s and 90s. So I think a lot of that work was a response to what was going on in the culture during that time, but that's really what got me into the world of cyborg, and the sort of phantom of this idea of the cyborg. So from my perspective, the cyborg is a representation of the human as not only a biological, single, isolated organism, but the human is always in culture, and it's always in culture with technology. It always is a prosthesis. So whether that's as extreme as somebody on a kidney dialysis machine to keep them alive, they're a cyborg, because without that technology, they would not survive, right? To, I'm using a pen, to do my work. So the pen becomes the prosthesis, the technology to enable the human to live out their life, and, increase their culture and their life world of knowledge and all the rest of it. So humans and technology are very much kind of intertwined. We've never really had one without the other, from the earliest humans who were using tools. But for me now, in contemporary culture, we see that connection just growing ever deeper. into our bodies, but also into our cultures. Because if we were, for example, to turn off the lights, turn off all the servers, turn off all our digital services, a lot of people would die. They wouldn't be able to survive, because key services are delivered through technologies. But also we would regress. It would feel that we would really regress back a very long time, because we rely so heavily on technologies for our everyday needs and our everyday lives, and fulfilling our ambitions and what it means to be human. We now in contemporary culture can't really decouple that from technology. It's just part of us. It's part of our, I'm speaking to you only because of technology, or we would never meet, and that's the same for so many humans. It's a huge, not only an enabler, but it's us. That is who we are. We are the technology. So for me, that is what is meant by this representation of the cyborg.
Wow, so beautiful. It's so true. So true. And I love this like how you summed it up. Technology is not an enabler where people have reached, but you're saying it's us, because without it, it lets us be our most human best.
Absolutely. Yeah. It enables us to live out our identities, but without it, we wouldn't have those identities. You wouldn't be a podcaster, and I wouldn't be able to do so many remote focus groups and whatever. It's produced so much culture and so much of humanity, and we're the ones that have created it. I think, again, there's this tendency to think of technology, the scary thing over there with its own power, but all of that power comes from us, and it's amazing. I think you're right when we think about it like that.
Yeah, amazing. You've talked about, so somewhere in the article there was a mention of the superheroes, and
yes. Oh yes.
It's so fascinating too, and the Wonder Woman as a symbol of the power of the femininity and all. Could you just share a bit about how that is impacting us? Because suddenly there is this whole, although the science fiction, I love science fiction too, because it shows what's possible,
Absolutely. And even in our imaginations. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And there's always a deeper truth.
Yes.
It's not, you can't say it's a linear progression, but yes, there is a tendency we're moving towards. It's not, it's fictional representation of where we are headed, or where, there are already signs of where we are moving. I think that's why it's so telling, and it's so enriching, that someone could actually, like the Black Mirror, the entire series, the way we are going, where this can land us, and it becomes so telling, because the full impact of it is out there in front of us. So the superheroes, and how do you talk about the cyborg and transgressing boundaries and Wonder Woman?
Yes, all these wonderful things, these wonderful images that can save us. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Yes, absolutely, that we as humans often think about technology in our sci-fi stories as this dystopic force, that where we are moving to a place where we are losing control. And I think it goes hand in hand as well with the narrative around environmental degradation and this feeling that we're coming to the end of the world. And a really good friend of mine has written a great book about this, actually, The Mall at the End of the World, thinking about this dystopic future where, imagine, that there are no longer any humans, but actually technologies just carry on. So you've got these automated technologies that just carry on working, with no kind of purpose, but markets will carry on, the economy will carry on because you've got these automated processes, even though everybody's dead, which is quite really interesting, but quite a scary dystopia. So I think we can see cyborgs and monsters, as Haraway talks a lot about cyborgs and monsters in her manifesto. And again, yes, you're right. For me, very interesting superheroes and our depictions and idealization of these figures as two halves of the same coin. Really, we've got this fear of a dystopian future, of the end of us, the end of humanity, but we look to the superhero as this savior figure, and maybe it's a bit of a replacement for religion in a more and more secular Western world. I don't think it's a coincidence that Marvel and the superhero genre is the most popular genre in the West, and yet we are the most secular, society. I think that's quite an interesting, correlation there. But in the book chapter I wrote for Science of Superheroes, which was about Wonder Woman, it was really focused on her prosthesis, her technology, her lasso of truth. So I was really interested in thinking about that concept, both from a feminist perspective, but also the technological, and where did that idea come from? And it was fascinating doing research for that book chapter, because I discovered, and I didn't realize this before, that the inventor of Wonder Woman and this lasso idea was also the inventor of the lie detector. Really interesting to kind of unpick that history. And he had lots of kind of issues with his own relationship to women and relationships and the power of the feminine. So it's from quite a male gaze perspective, this Wonder Woman figure, which is also quite interesting to unpack the power of that, the sort of sexual power of that. But the lasso itself as this image that can help us to always force a true outcome and to make sure the truth comes out. Again, it's this sort of idea that superheroes can do things that we can't, and I think when you look at the reality of the technology, such as a lie detector, actually that's it's got a lot of fallibility. It's never going to be able to actually tell the truth. Nothing can. But this idea and image of the superhero has got all these technologies and they've got all these powers and ways that they can solve all of our problems. I just think that's really fascinating, the way that we as humans never tire of those stories. We love them, and there's always another Marvel movie coming out about it. I wasn't expecting that. What is that?
Rapid fire.
That's so funny. I thought it was the cyborg had arrived.
Yeah, dystopian. Okay, mother's best advice.
Nothing is ever perfect. Never expect perfection, and that's so true. So true.
Okay, alternate profession could have been
either a vet or a barrister.
Interesting. What would you do on Mars for fun?
Try to get away from Mars. I am not Elon Musk. I have no desire to go to Mars.
Makes total sense. Okay. What is your most often used phrase?
Most often used phrase. What's the margin on that?
Okay, a book you'd like to gift to all your friends.
To all my female friends, this one, Careering by Daisy Buchanan. It's really funny. It's not suitable for work, but it's really funny.
Thank you. Nice. Okay. What would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Don't bother trying to be an investment manager. Research is much more interesting.
Nice. Okay. What's your favorite childhood memory?
Probably a birthday party, a surprise birthday party that my mum and dad put on for me when I must have been 6 or 7, and it's just that, that cozy, warm feeling of like everything was amazing and surprising, and I felt very loved. So that stays with me.
How nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. If you were to devote the rest of your life to philanthropy, what cause would you choose?
I would probably choose autism and neurodiversity. My brother is autistic, and it's a really important, I think, cause that's just, it's under-researched and underrepresented in society.
Yeah, and not even understood properly. Yeah, okay. What is your greatest joy?
Probably, aside from research and ethnography, probably my cat and my family.
Oh, nice.
In that order.
Nobody's offended, okay?
They know.
Okay. Okay. How would you like strangers to remember you?
As that really weird cyborg lady that did good research.
Felicity, a little bird has told us that you are a singer. So can our audiences benefit from a few melodious lines from Felicity herself?
I feel sorry for your audiences at this point, Jasvari, but I did. Yes, I did used to be in a band, so I can sing somewhat. I can sing a little bit. Yes, this is Aerosmith, and just some lyrics from their song "Crazy." Crazy, crazy, I go crazy. What can I do? Honey, I feel like the color blue. Ooh. There you go.
Oh, lovely. I'm so grateful that you did this.
You're welcome. Okay. Just for you.
I'd like to believe so. Okay. Okay. So I'd request you to share any online addresses, Felicity, if people want to reach out to you, have any questions.
Absolutely. So I'm Felicity Heathcote-Márcz on LinkedIn, and that's Heathcote-Marcz, because no one can ever spell it. I'm also on Twitter at @SharpSister, and anybody can reach out to me at Simple Usability as well. It's felicity.heathcote-marcz@simpleusability.com. So we'd be more than happy to hear from any of your dear listeners. Please, everyone, like, share, and subscribe to the Jasvari podcast, Conversations at the Edge. It was wonderful taking part, and Jasvari is an excellent interviewer, and she has many wonderful conversations. So please do subscribe and listen.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to host you.